Redemption's Fury, the tale of Duke Blake, written by Reuben White. Chapter 1. The Lone Wolf's arrival. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the barren landscape as Duke Blake rode into the town of Redemption. His horse's hooves kicked up clouds of dust that swirled in the air, adding to the desolation that seemed to permeate every inch of the Wild West town. Duke was a man of few words, his face weathered by years of harsh living under the unforgiving sun. His eyes, sharp and steely, scanned the streets with a fierce intensity as he searched for any sign of his missing daughters. The townsfolk watched him warily from behind shuttered windows and cracked doorways, whispering among themselves as the Duke's reputation preceded him. They knew him as the Lone Wolf, a solitary figure who rode into town with a purpose that brooked no interference. As Duke dismounted in front of the dilapidated saloon, the creak of leather and the jingle of spurs echoed in the quiet streets. He pushed open the swinging doors and stepped inside, the dim interior bathed in smoke and the smell of whiskey. The patrons fell silent as Duke's presence filled the room, his eyes sweeping over the faces of the rough-looking men gathered around the tables. He could feel their eyes on him, sizing him up, but Duke paid them no mind as he made his way to the bar. "Whiskey," he grunted, his voice rough like gravel as he tossed a coin onto the scarred wood. The bartender nodded silently, pouring Duke a drink without a word. Duke took a sip, the fiery liquid burning a path down his throat as he contemplated his next move. He knew that finding his daughters would not be easy, but he was determined to do whatever it took to bring them home. Outside, the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting a blood-red glow over the town of Redemption. But in Duke's heart, there was only darkness as he steeled himself for the journey ahead. For the Lone Wolf had arrived, and nothing would stand in his way until his daughters were safe once more. Chapter 2. The lawless town. The town of Redemption lay shrouded in a thick haze of dust and despair, a haven for the lawless and the lost. Buildings stood weather-beaten and worn, their wooden facades bearing the scars of countless battles fought in the name of survival. As Duke stepped out of the saloon, he was met with the sight of tumbleweeds rolling lazily down the dusty streets, carried by the whispering wind. The air was thick with the acrid scent of gun smoke, a constant reminder of the violence that lurked just beneath the surface. He could feel the weight of the town's gaze upon him as he strode purposefully down the main thoroughfare, his spurs jingling with each determined step. Duke's presence commanded attention, drawing curious glances from the few souls brave enough to venture outside. But Duke paid them no mind as he made his way to the sheriff's office, his jaw set in a firm line of determination. He knew that time was of the essence, that every moment wasted brought his daughters closer to danger. The sheriff's office stood squat and unassuming, its wooden door bearing the marks of countless hands that had pushed it open in search of justice. Duke pushed it open now, the hinges creaking in protest as he stepped inside. The sheriff looked up from his desk, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of the Lone Wolf standing in his doorway. "Duke Blake," he said, his voice tinged with both respect and wariness. "What brings you to Redemption?" "My daughters," Duke replied, his voice low and steady. "They were taken by Blackjack Montgomery and his gang. I need your help to find them." The sheriff's expression darkened at the mention of Blackjack Montgomery, his hand instinctively drifting towards the revolver at his hip. "Montgomery's a snake," he muttered, his voice heavy with contempt. "But I'll do what I can to help you, Duke. Your daughters deserve better than to be caught up in his web." With that, the sheriff rose from his desk, his resolve mirrored in Duke's steely gaze. Together, they would scour every inch of Redemption in search of Duke's daughters, for in a town as lawless as this, time was a luxury they could ill afford to waste. Chapter 3. The pursuit begins. Duke Blake's quest for his abducted daughters plunged him deeper into the heart of Redemption's darkness. With the sheriff at his side, they combed the town for any scrap of information that might lead them to Blackjack Montgomery and his gang. Every dusty alley and shadowed corner held secrets, and Duke was determined to uncover them all. He questioned the locals, his sharp eyes piercing through the facade of fear and deceit that permeated the town. But leads were scarce, and time slipped through Duke's fingers like grains of sand in the desert wind. As the days stretched into weeks, Duke's frustration grew, gnawing at his resolve like a hungry coyote. He knew that every moment spent searching was another moment his daughters spent in peril, and the thought tormented him day and night. But amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerged in the form of two unlikely allies, Jack and Rachel. Jack was a seasoned gunslinger, his weathered face lined with the scars of countless battles fought and won. He had seen the worst that the Wild West had to offer, and yet, he stood tall and unyielding in the face of adversity. His loyalty to Duke ran deep, forged in the crucible of shared hardship and mutual respect. Rachel, on the other hand, was a frontier nurse with a heart as tough as the leather of her boots. Her healing hands had saved countless lives in the unforgiving wilderness, and her steely resolve made her a force to be reckoned with. She had taken an immediate liking to Duke and his daughters, her protective instincts kicking into overdrive at the thought of their plight. Together, the trio formed an unlikely alliance, united by their shared goal of rescuing Duke's daughters from the clutches of Blackjack Montgomery. With Jack's expertise in tracking and Rachel's knowledge of the land, they set out into the wilderness, determined to bring an end to the reign of terror that gripped redemption. But as they ventured further into the unknown, Duke couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at his insides. His past loomed large in his mind, a shadowy specter that threatened to consume him with doubt and despair. Yet, he pushed on, his love for his daughters burning bright like a beacon in the darkness, guiding him ever forward on his quest for redemption. Chapter 4. The Showdown. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape as Duke Blake and his allies rode ever closer to their quarry. The air crackled with tension, the scent of gunpowder hanging heavy on the wind as they approached the outlaw hideout where Blackjack Montgomery and his gang lay in wait. Duke's heart pounded in his chest as they dismounted, the weight of his Colt Peacemaker reassuring against his hip. Jack and Rachel exchanged a silent glance, their eyes mirroring Duke's determination as they prepared for the confrontation ahead. With a silent nod, they advanced, their boots kicking up clouds of dust as they crept closer to the ramshackle cabin that served as the gang's stronghold. The sound of laughter and revelry drifted through the air, a stark contrast to the grim purpose that drove Duke and his companions forward. As they reached the outskirts of the camp, Duke signaled for Jack and Rachel to flank him, their movements swift and sure as they closed in on their prey. The tension in the air was palpable now, every nerve in Duke's body on edge as he prepared to face the man responsible for his daughter's abduction. With a sudden burst of movement, they burst into the clearing, guns drawn and ready for action. The gang members sprang to their feet, their shouts of alarm drowned out by the crack of gunfire as the battle erupted in earnest. Bullets flew like angry hornets, whizzing past Duke's head as he returned fire with deadly accuracy. Jack and Rachel fought at his side, their weapons blazing as they laid waste to the outlaws who stood between them and their goal. But amidst the chaos and confusion, Duke's gaze remained fixed on one man alone, Blackjack Montgomery. He stood tall and defiant amidst the carnage, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity as he faced off against Duke in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Their guns roared as they traded shots, the sound echoing through the canyon like thunder as Duke pressed forward with relentless determination. Each step brought him closer to his target, his heart pounding in his chest as he prepared to deliver the justice that had eluded him for so long. And then, in a moment of perfect clarity, Duke saw his chance. With a swift and decisive motion, he raised his gun and fired, the bullet finding its mark with unerring accuracy as Blackjack Montgomery fell to the ground, defeated at last by the relentless pursuit of justice that burned bright in Duke's heart. Chapter 5. The final showdown. The dust settled in the aftermath of the fierce gunfight, the air thick with the acrid scent of spent gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Duke Blake stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving with exertion as he scanned the clearing for any sign of movement. But there was only silence now, broken only by the low moans of the wounded and the distant call of a lone coyote. The outlaw gang lay defeated, their leader Blackjack Montgomery lying motionless at Duke's feet. With a weary sigh, Duke holstered his gun, his fingers trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He could scarcely believe that the moment he had longed for, the moment of reckoning with the man who had torn his family apart, had finally arrived. As he approached Blackjack Montgomery's prone form, Duke felt a surge of conflicting emotions wash over him. Anger, sorrow, and a fierce determination to see justice served warred within him, threatening to consume him whole. But above all else, there was love. Love for his daughters, whose faces haunted his every waking moment and fueled his relentless pursuit of vengeance. Love for the family he had lost, and the promise of redemption that lay on the other side of this final confrontation. Blackjack Montgomery stirred at Duke's approach, his eyes flickering open with a mixture of defiance and resignation. He knew that his time was up, that there would be no escape from the consequences of his actions. Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Duke's hand hovered over his gun, his resolve steeling as he prepared to deliver the final blow. But then, something unexpected happened. In the depths of Blackjack Montgomery's eyes, Duke saw a glimmer of remorse, a flicker of humanity that spoke to the man he had once been before he had been consumed by greed and violence. For a moment, Duke hesitated, his finger poised on the trigger as he grappled with the weight of his decision. But then, with a heavy heart, he knew what he had to do. With a resigned sigh, Duke reached out a hand to help Blackjack Montgomery to his feet. "It's over," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But it doesn't have to end like this. There's still a chance for redemption, if you're willing to take it." Blackjack Montgomery stared at him in disbelief, his eyes brimming with tears as the weight of Duke's words settled over him like a heavy blanket. And then, with a nod of acceptance, he allowed Duke to lead him away from the battlefield, their footsteps echoing in the quiet stillness of the desert as they walked towards a future filled with uncertainty, but also hope. Chapter 6. Aftermath. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the town of Redemption as Duke Blake and Blackjack Montgomery emerged from the wilderness, their faces worn and weary from the trials they had endured. Behind them, the rest of Blackjack's gang followed, their heads bowed in shame as they faced the consequences of their actions. As they entered the town, the streets were eerily quiet, the usual bustle of activity replaced by a heavy silence that hung in the air like a shroud. The townsfolk watched from behind shuttered windows and closed doors, their expressions a mixture of fear and curiosity as they awaited the outcome of Duke's confrontation with Blackjack Montgomery. Duke led Blackjack to the sheriff's office, his heart heavy with the weight of the choices he had made. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was determined to see it through to the end, whatever the cost. Inside the sheriff's office, Duke handed Blackjack over to the authorities, his gaze unwavering as he watched the outlaw leader being led away to face justice for his crimes. The sheriff nodded in silent approval, his eyes reflecting the gratitude of a town saved from the brink of destruction. But Duke's thoughts were elsewhere as he turned to leave, his mind filled with visions of his daughters and the uncertain future that lay ahead. He knew that their journey was far from over, but he also knew that they would face it together, as a family united in their determination to overcome whatever challenges lay in their path. As he stepped back out into the dusty streets of Redemption, Duke was met with a sight that took his breath away. The townsfolk had emerged from their hiding places, their faces alight with relief and gratitude as they gathered around him, their voices raised in a chorus of thanks for his bravery and sacrifice. For in the end, it was not just Duke who had saved Redemption, but the collective spirit of a town united in the face of adversity. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the weary faces of its inhabitants, redemption breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that its darkest days were finally behind it. Chapter 7. Into the sunset. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Duke Blake stood on the outskirts of redemption, his heart heavy with the weight of all that had transpired. The town lay behind him, its streets now silent and still, a testament to the trials and triumphs that had unfolded within its dusty confines. With a heavy sigh, Duke mounted his horse and turned towards the horizon, the open road stretching out before him like an endless ribbon of possibility. His daughters were safe now, their laughter echoing in his memory as he rode off into the fading light of day. But even as he left redemption behind, Duke knew that his journey was far from over. The scars of the past still lingered, their shadows following him like ghosts in the night. Yet, he rode on, his heart filled with a quiet determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For Duke, Blake was not just a gunslinger or a lone wolf. He was a father, a protector, a beacon of hope in a world shrouded in darkness. And though the road ahead would be long and treacherous, he rode it with his head held high, his spirit unbroken by the trials of the past. As the stars began to twinkle in the indigo sky above, Duke felt a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet assurance that no matter what lay ahead, he would face it with the same courage and determination that had brought him to this moment. And so, as the lone wolf rode off into the sunset, his heart heavy with the burden of his past but hopeful for the future, he left behind a legacy of courage and love that would endure long after he was gone. For in the dusty, rugged charm of the Old West, Duke Blake's spirit would live on, a reminder to all who knew him of the power of resilience, redemption, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. If you are enjoying adventures in the Old West channel, hit the subscribe button for future posts.